Every season, we fans get it proven to us time and time again that the medium of anime is able to run the full gamut of story genres to great success, best exemplified by the constant deluge of fantastic new shows in the action, comedy, and romance anime spheres. However, the one area anime has barely managed to shamble through historically has been horror. The horror in anime just isn't frightening due to how the animation looks and feels.
God, can you go bomb an abortion clinic or something?
Well, that isn't very scary. And there are only a handful of horror anime that people hold in high regard. However, that's mostly due to their other plot elements and or gore factor rather than their actual creepiness or well-written suspense. But in honor of the spooky month, Dark Gathering is here to completely change the game with the scariest thing anime has ever seen. A lolly with a crowbar. I'm here to speak to you about your car's extended warranty. For the uninitiated, because barely anyone is watching this show, Dark Gathering is the new anime taking the horror genre by storm. The anime is about a boy who's a literal ghost magnet. Okay, now hear me out. A girl who exists only to bully ghosts, collecting them like Pokemon and gangbanging them with other ghosts into submission. The entire point of which is so that she can forge a ghost army to save her mother, who was taken by a giant ghost fetus. No, I'm not making that up. And rounding out the cast is her hot sister, who exists solely to drive the Mystery Inc. crew around. It ain't much, but it's honest work. It's more similar in feel to an anime like Mieruko-chan than it is something like Higurashi, but it uses the spooky ghost premise with much greater impact without all the fan service. Not that I was complaining. Things like the ghosts are both visually unsettling and disturbing, but then you have the more traditional jump scare ghosts that, while less disturbing, have the same amount of care and effort put into their creation and are elevated via good use of music, something that the entire show benefits from, but that we'll touch on more later. That aside, the horror vibe was easily at its peak of most fucked up, disturbing, and downright creepiest thing I've seen in anime with the fire ghost scene, wherein the suspense of whether or not they'd make it home without the car exploding was surprisingly intense, steadily rising until it finally crescendos when the light turns red and they punch through it, going as fast as the car can take them, not knowing what will happen next as the fire grows in power, and then they're able to make it through and the curse is transferred, eliminating the threat. The entire scene serves to show how great the anime is at setting the mood for any given moment, crafting an atmosphere of genuine dread for what may happen next. Yeah, it may be obvious that the leads aren't gonna die, but the anime goes so far to unsettle and unnerve you with aspects like that, and that's what sets it apart from all the other horror anime in the genre, on top of the music, which I'll cover in more detail later on in the video. You said that twice already. Part of what makes the horror work so well and really sells the show is the aforementioned trio of main characters, as they mesh so well by all coming together under the collective umbrella of the dubiously selfish yet selfless ideas behind each of their motivations. Keitaro, for example, tends to avoid the supernatural as his friend was hurt in the past due to his ghost magnetism, so he wants to avoid anyone getting hurt again. But Yayoi, as mentioned prior, still uses him to attract more ghosts to build up her army. On the other spooky, scary hand, Yayoi does genuinely consider Keitaro to be a friend and wants to help him remove his curse, and Keitaro likewise wants to ensure Yayoi and Eiko are protected from harm, with the best way to do so being breaking his own curse and helping to save Yayoi's mother. Finally, while Eiko may just seem like the quirky yandere to round out the pack, this is doing a lot for me, even she contributes more than it may seem at first glance, as she understands Keitaro's masochistic love for fear and is the reason why he and Yayoi even met in the first place, as she was the one who planned it all out. Together, they make up the perfect dynamic from both narrative and comedic standpoints, as their desires intertwine beautifully with one another, and the silly nonsense of the two sisters manages to pair very well with Keitaro's straight man shtick in a way that usually falls flat in most anime. And all that just goes to show how Dark Gathering is miraculously able to take the threads of story that are on the darker side and weave them through with more comedic elements, creating a wonderful tapestry that could just as easily have become a shoddy patchwork if not for having the right staff, which is to be expected from the guy who directed Setten Academy. Get it? Because there's titties? It's not only hilariously amusing, but it's also insanely smart, and it's the aforementioned production that really pushes the series above and beyond. The music, for example, accentuates each and every scene, and the director's intrinsic understanding of both horror and comedy is able to make the horror quite unsettling, whilst at the same time keeping the comedic scenes hitting just as hard, taking it above and beyond when they're able to go from cracking a joke immediately into the horrific. It's not something that's easily done, and it's a testament to the skill of the staff that they're able to best make use of the OST to aid this delicately perfect blend of horror and comedy, in addition to an interesting overarching storyline. They're great with crafting impactful scenes, as well as the direction at the end of the first episode when Yayoi takes down the phone booth ghost is 10 out of 10 material. The choice of angles and lighting with the glow in her eyes as she came down illuminated by the moonlight is just mwah. And it's moments like these that really help the anime stand out as one of the premier horror-filled ghost-busting adventure series alongside anime like Gegege no Kitaro. Neko Musume. I've already gone on about the music already, but I can't stress enough that it really does help push this anime into greatness. Even if you're not a fan of the very Halloween-y sounding music, you fucking heathen, you've got to respect that the composers have brought their A-game to this anime, and that's honestly to be expected when one of them is Kota motherfucking Yamamoto, Sawano's understudy, who also produced the music for Attack on Titan Season 4. Although that anime felt as though Kota were being instructed to mimic Sawano, thus leading to a lot of the tracks sounding inferior when compared to the tracks Sawano originally produced, this project allows him to really come into his own and craft tracks that sound like his own unique style, whilst also mixing in things he learned from his time working with Sawano, like in the song you're hearing in the background. That's good! The anime likewise makes excellent use of foreshadowing to keep your interest from ever waning. For example, in the very first episode, it reveals very little of Eiko's nature, which is to the show's benefit because it puts you on your toes and makes you want to pay closer attention, as it elaborates on her true nature in the 3rd and 6th episodes, instead having sprinkled in teases and hints leading up to them respectively. These range from smaller things like Eiko knowing where Keitaro was despite splitting up, foreshadowing the reveal 2 episodes later that she's always stalking him in some way or another, to bigger things like having Eiko wear gloves to allude to her being the friend of Keitaro's that was cursed in the past. This specific point takes the foreshadowing a step further, as when she shows Yayoi the photo of Keitaro's cursed hand, it's of a left hand when Keitaro is cursed on his right, making it very subtle and something that many wouldn't pick up on, and while it's not the best in the business, it is handled well, just like the rest of the show, as every scene present in the anime always serves a purpose to the greater narrative or the characters themselves, even if it sometimes appears otherwise, like Eiko being a creepy stalker. While this specific characteristic is played for comedy, it also reveals more of Yayoi's character at the same time by having her play into the joke so that you know she wants in on it, but she also admonishes Eiko for her yikes behavior while still opting to humor her rather than push her away so that she can better keep it under control, not only for her own benefit but for Keitaro's as well, because he's into little girls. Everything I've mentioned so far comes together to make something truly special, and while the plot may be simple, this just further facilitates the creep factor as, despite being produced in a Monster of the Week style format, such a formula allows for the anime to focus on different types of ghosts for a variety of scenes, resulting in us getting bone-chilling scenes that have not yet been possible in anime as, well, yes, this creepy monster suddenly appearing on the car is a little scary, and the nerves on his hand will skeeve you out, that's fucking disgusting. It's this segment with the videotape that I touched on earlier that's the most flat-out disturbing. Well, the setup for it is a bit funny as they're sitting in on a college lecture and the professor goes, "Welcome to my scary stories class. This is a videotape where the guy logs out of life on camera, and it's said that if you watch it, you'll die." So anyways, let me hook up this VHS. And while that's absolutely hilarious, the actual tape accomplishes something much more sinister. While the scene does play into what I said earlier about being able to go from comedy to horror at the drop of a hat, the tape itself is able to perfectly capture the snuff film vibe in a way that is genuinely unnerving. There's no music being played, it's soundless outside of eerie static, and the video has a filter on it that makes it seem real. And it's when all those pieces come together in that singular moment, it transcends the goofy anime art you've been watching up until this point. It captures the essence of such dreary subject matter in a bleak, plain manner that even actual horror movies are unable to pull off. And when it then switches to Keitaro, it pulls you that much more into it, proving that this scene is a masterclass in how chilling something can really be, even as a cartoon, without getting into gory detail like some animated films depicting real-life tragedies have. It's next level in its intensity, and that's what helps put this anime above everything else that's come before it. It's creepy and gets under your skin, yet it looks like a normal anime, and I can't help but gush about how well done a job the staff did in this particular scene. And while they're not quite able to measure up to the heights of that scene again, many other scenes will likewise have you feeling their intensity or even feelings of dread. And the fact that the comedy is not too long after it is what helps make the anime remain fresh. If it were always something funny or something disturbing, it'd wane on the viewer's patience and tolerance, but that isn't the case here because they have incredible synergy when working in tandem, like lotion in my hand. However, since Dark Gathering is all about collecting ghosts to fight against the Cunny Demon, it does take on the weakness of being in a Monster of the Week format. Most of the enjoyment comes from how well they handle the horror-comedy ratio that week, in addition to properly developing the characters, which means that if it fails at either, you're left with a bit of a foul taste in your mouth until the next episode. In manga format, like the source material is, this isn't much of a hindrance, but it certainly is here in an animated medium. It's obvious at a glance that this anime is more of a one-to-one adaptation, and while that can be fine in some cases as it only exists to amplify what was in the manga and not change anything else, a la Spy Spike's family, this can lead to issues in pacing, storyboarding, dialogue, and more. They're two completely different mediums and don't necessarily translate well into one another, and that's why adaptations like Bleach and Monogatari work so well, because on top of enhancing the material in similar ways to this series, they also expand on things to give you more context and cut and rearrange things to improve the pacing so that they flow better in their new format. Most anime don't do that, so it's not a problem unique to this show, but it's almost always a flaw that most fans just have to accept and ignore until, like here, it becomes a bit too noticeable on occasion, like he always advances. Honestly, the biggest flaw that the anime has is, ironically, the production looks like a cheap isekai anime, even though I just said the production is what makes it so good. It relies on the incessant use of flashback and recap as early as episode 2, and that really holds it back from being as good as it could be. The direction, while strong for the horror and comedy, is also just kind of bland in many other matters, and the storyboarding isn't all that great either. Most scenes are just stock backgrounds with characters standing around, and while it does deliver when it matters, and that's ultimately what's most important, being so dry the rest of the time, on top of the use of silly stock sound effects, really hinders Dark Gathering from being the best it could be. And on the narrative front, Keitaro drags his feet for several episodes when trying to make up his mind on whether he wants to protect Eiko and dive into the occult, or continue trying to live a normal life, which obviously hasn't worked up until this point. I guess he just forgot about this. It's not that his hesitance is poorly written, it's just that it kills the pacing of the show for several episodes, as this decision should be an immediate one. The rest of the show is fine in this regard, but the issue is that this happens as early as episode 3, so it can be a bit of a slog to get through when you just started enjoying it, making some episodes even feel like filler because of it. Fortunately, the pacing does improve after the fact, but there are still a few odd moments in episode 5 and 6 where the resolution to the episodes is a bit confusing and harder to understand than they should be, to the point where it almost seems like things from the source have been flat out removed to lead to such confusing resolutions. God, I wish that were me. So while it is certainly an anime that has its flaws, just like everything else, and most of it is just par for the course, the parts that are done well are done exceedingly so, some of which verging on being the best in the industry, and that's enough to make it not only the dark horse of the summer 2023 anime season, but also the best horror anime in decades.